in round 8, and I will be as comprehensive as I can. There are a few new angles, not least of which is that the established professor grade is now the top promotional grade, replacing the personal professor grade. And just to spell out right from the start, anyone who's already a personal professor must go through the same applications process as anyone else to become an established professor. There's no regrading process where it's a different pay scale. It must be an application. So let me see if I can get this thing to move forward. I've not had that before. I'm clicking on it there. So key principles. Promotion is based on achieving recognized standards. It's not like in the bad old days or in many other institutions where people are competing against each other for a fixed number of places. If you meet the standards, you're promoted, or at least internally we determine a prima facie case, and it goes to external assessment then. It's based on academic peer review, including external elements. We have 2 external members of the panel, in addition to 2 ex officio members from within the university, myself as chair and the VP research, and then 3 members from each of the 4 colleges. And we are gender balanced. So there's no cap on the number of places. There are regular 6-monthly deadlines, and I'll give you the next range of deadlines at the end of this presentation. High levels of performance are expected across each of the 3 core criteria as appropriate to contract, and that's research, scholarship, teaching and learning, contribution. Candidates are expected to demonstrate that they are performing at the level to which they have applied for promotion, and are likely to continue performing at that level. And that's what's meant by trajectory when we use that word, and it may pop up in the guidelines and so on. It's not that we expect you to be on a kind of, you're climbing Mount Everest and your performance is doubling every year. It's that you may well currently be at this grade, but you're performing at that grade, and you've been doing that for a number of years, and you're looking likely to continue to do that. That is the basis on which you will then be promoted to that higher grade. And then all normal and academic and administrative activity can be included in the application, whether explicitly referred to in the guidelines or not. So I do sometimes get requests that people are doing such and such an activity and can we explicitly reference it in the guidelines. I'm wary of going down that path too far, because then all sorts of people start assuming that because what they're doing isn't explicitly referenced, it doesn't count. If it is a legitimate part of your job, it counts. Okay, and we've tried to structure the application forms in such a way that there is some home for everything you do somewhere on the form. All academics with a minimum of 3 years service at the University of Galway are eligible to apply to any higher grade, irrespective of current grade. And the other thing is that lecturer A may apply for senior lecturer stroke associate professor B, and vice versa. So you can go crossways, but be clear about the expectations. One thing that has not happened in this scheme is that senior lecturer A is the promotional route for people who are on a lecturer B contract but aren't producing the research. It is not the soft option. It is a high bar and a high standard in the teaching and learning front. So I said earlier, we're gender balanced, we're exactly 50-50 male-female. The university is committed to EDI in the scheme, and progress is constantly reviewed in that regard. That includes a specific mechanism for recognizing protected leave and adjusting achievements upwards for the purposes of assessment. The basis for this adjustment is calculated for each applicant where they have cited such protected leave by the office of the VP EDI. And then I sit with the person and go through the basis of the calculations and make sure we've got it right. But they do the calculations. To put it at its most simple, colleagues, effectively what happens is the multiplier is used to give equivalent credit for achievements based on the average performance when you weren't on protected leave, to give equivalent average performance levels of achievement for the periods of protected leave. If I take, and this is where numerical factors kick in. So let's take something very simple. Somebody's been here 10 years, they've got 24 publications, but they've also had 2 years of protected leave. And whether you take the whole year, for example, on maternity or not, we count it as a whole year. So effectively, they've been working for 8 years. They've got 24 publications. Therefore, they've got 3 publications per year. For the purposes of calculating what they are, for the purposes of assessing the promotion, we then give credit for 3 publications per year for the 2 years of protected leave. So notionally, that person then would have 30, and that would be the basis of the assessment for that criterion for promotion. Ditto research income, ditto PhD and postdoc supervisions and so on. Those things that we can actually count. Okay, so that's how that mechanism works. Candidates may offer in a specific box any additional evidence they may wish to share in respect of their achievements and or circumstances. That's an additional box at the end of the form. We also, by the way, have introduced a box for commentary against all of the individual criteria, and including those where you think it might be just numerical, you know, your list of publications, your Irish profile, whatever it may be. So it's up to you to try and frame your performance for us. That actually is something that you should give serious consideration to, rather than simply presenting stuff in an abstract, factual way, leaving us to deduce. Okay. And it's a place not to be modest, but not to exaggerate either. Okay. As begun with round 3, a COVID impact box remains in the form. This will assist the APC in assessing whether any criteria that are initially deemed as not being achieved are likely to have been achieved, but for the impact of COVID. And then financial considerations in respect of affordability to the school, college, or university play no part in any individual assessment. So we do get a form from the head of school countersigned by the dean, but they may not, under any circumstances, make arguments along the lines of we've had too many promotions, or our budget balance sheet doesn't work, you can't promote this person. That simply is not allowed. And I brief the heads of school and deans clearly in that regard as well. All unsuccessful candidates will receive detailed written feedback on the reasons why they were unsuccessful. They may also request an oral feedback meeting in a timely fashion within 30 days of receiving written feedback. All unsuccessful candidates may appeal to the Academic Promotions Appeals Committee, and it's a requirement of the scheme that a candidate attend for oral feedback in order to be eligible to appeal. Any appeal must be lodged within 30 days of this meeting. Now, the oral feedback notes, we've been doing almost a dictation session up to now for those oral feedback meetings, but I've looked at the scheme, how it was originally constituted, and that is meant to be a short oral feedback meeting and notes, and that is how we will proceed from here on in. Bear in mind, those feedback meetings are designed to elaborate on the reasons why the promotion was successful or unsuccessful. You can apply, successful candidates can also ask for a feedback meeting, okay? And that is its sole purpose. So, and we will adhere to that. The role of the APAC then is to consider whether or not due process has prevailed in the consideration by the APC of an application for promotion. The APAC may not form a second academic judgment on an application. And they have made some helpful comments in terms of how we might refine or the guidelines in terms of the process and so on. And that has been a useful addition to the process as well. But they do not form a second academic judgment. The grounds for appeal. These are the only grounds for appeal. Failure to follow in a due manner the university policy and procedures for the consideration of applications for promotion. All university policies and procedures are subject to statutory anti-discriminatory requirements. B, the denial of natural justice. And C, manifestly unfair or unreasonable application of the criteria for granting of promotions. Now, that does not open the door to a second academic judgment. The word manifestly was inserted a couple of rounds ago on the recommendation of the lawyer who is on the appeals committee. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't understand the import of it, but unfair or unreasonable application, some were taking as, well, you've been unfair, you didn't promote me and I think I should be promoted. It's not that simple. You would have to demonstrate clearly and unambiguously what unfairness occurred, not simply an opinion. So the way we proceed with the applications is this. So I outlined the structure of the committee. We have two externals. They do not score applicants. They are there for the process, and they will comment in the discussion where appropriate, but they do not score. The other 14 of us do. In advance of the meeting, then 4 committee members are allocated as core readers to each application to go through the individual application, particularly fine detail. So that will be, there's a whole chart to be drawn up, which I do, which has to be incredibly balanced. So it's 2 of the core readers for any individual application are from that applicant's college, 2 are from a different college or colleges, and 2 are always male and 2 female. And they, because of the sheer volume of applications that we get and the time scale for turning it around, we do our best to turn it around quickly, and sometimes there are hiccups along the way. I allocate 4 core readers, and they are charged, everyone reads everything, but the 4 core readers are charged with going through your application with a particularly fine tooth comb. And they may then go and say, you know, I see such and such, but this doesn't seem to add up, or we validate information, by the way. If you provide information about research income, we contact the research office to validate that information about PhD completions and postdoc supervisions. We validate that as well in our internal systems. But those 4 core readers, just they get everybody gets a subset of the applications, and they're supposed to pay particular attention to the fine detail in those. But everybody does read everything. One of those 4 will be designated the feedback lead, and they take detailed notes during the discussions. And as is the way with these things, some people are very good at taking detailed notes that are effectively short bullet points, and others will be writing down loads. You can never know. But the point is, those notes they form the basis of the feedback to the applicants, but the feedback is subsequently agreed by all of us. So as I say, all applications are read by every member of the committee. Each member of the committee assesses and scores each application individually prior to the meeting. The 2 external members do not score. And what happens then, and I'll show you a spreadsheet, the kind of spreadsheet that we're confronted with, is those scores are submitted in advance, and they are put into a tabular form by Orla, and that table is presented, and it forms the basis for the discussion of the candidate. And I'll come to that and give you an example of how we would have done this with a fictionalized one. Sorry, not anonymized, fictionalized one. The committee as a whole discusses and agrees a consensus score for each criterion for the candidate. The relevant achievement has to be demonstrated in order for each criterion to receive a consensus decision of yes, i.e. that criterion has been achieved. So we do sometimes see in the scores that there is a mixed bag of scores on a 3-2-1 scale, and I'll explain that in a minute. And we thrash it out, but we must reach a consensus. No one individual has a veto, and everybody has abided by that. So if someone really is the lone outrider saying no, and everyone else or almost everyone else is saying yes, then unless that person persuades us through some factual information that actually here's why the criterion is not being met, then effectively we will go with the majority in that case. An individual does not have a veto, but they may well end up persuading others. Okay, so but it is all thrashed out. We do spend quite a lot of time on the applications, and sometimes an individual application will be discussed for an hour and a half to make sure that we're absolutely, and that's in addition to all the prior reading, by the way, and that's to make absolutely sure that we are comfortable with the decision that we're reaching. Okay. So let me scroll on down here. So prior to the meeting, as I say, each member of the committee submits their provisional scores in respect of each candidate. The scores are then transposed to a spreadsheet. This is the basis for discussion at the meeting. The score of 1 means that the candidate is assessed to be not achieving the criterion. Score of 2 means the assessor is unsure and needs input clarification from the discussion at APC. A score of 3 means the candidate is achieving the criterion. Okay, now these are the provisional scores submitted in advance. And the final score can only be a 3 or a 1, i.e. a yes or a no, simple binary. There's a 2 at this provisional stage, quite simply because we might have a professor of engineering assessing an application from French, or a professor of law assessing an application from medicine, or whatever. You get the point. And there may be some aspect of that application that they're looking at, because everyone's application is highly individual. They're looking at it and saying, I'm genuinely not sure whether that's good enough for that criterion. So they will give it a 2. Okay. But in the final analysis, the panel must agree either yay or nay against each of the criteria. When we get the spreadsheet, and I'll show you an example one in a minute, a fictionalized one, where there's a majority of 3s and no 1s, the score would be an automatic yes under this criterion, unless a panel member raises a discussion point. And even after the discussion, it's likely to be still a yes. All other profiles necessitate further discussion, and from this discussion, consensus usually emerges. There must be a consensus that a criterion is being achieved for a final consensus decision of yes. If we have a hung jury, then it's a no. And the protected leave multiplier and the COVID-19 impact are factored into the discussions and decisions, along with all other commentary that the candidate has offered. So this would be a typical fictitious, and what we would have is the names of the assessors down the left here. So each row would be the assessment of an individual assessor. And the way I would typically go through this is I would go through each column at a time. So if you look at the first column, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 2s, 10 3s. So that's a majority of 3s. There are no 1s. Automatic yes. I listen for 2 seconds. Nobody's objecting. Grand. That's a yes. Teaching and learning, unanimously 3s. So that's a yes. Contribution. Again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 2s, 9 3s. Majority of 3s, no 1s. So that's a yes. And I proceed along the way, and then you would, so postgrad, postdoctoral, unanimously 3s. Research impact, there are some 1s, we'll come back to it. Research standing, there are some 1s, we'll come back to it. Innovation and teaching, there's a 1, we'll come back to it. Pedagogic research funding, there are 1s, we'll come back to it. So we pocket the yeses, the automatic yeses, then we start the discussion. There would be a lead, feedback lead, there would be 3 other core readers, but I would typically, if there's 1 person and only 1 person giving something a 1, I would typically start with them. In this case, it would be assessor 11. For example, in innovation and teaching, it would be assessor 11, and I'd say, okay, what are your objections? But there are a lot of 2s there. I ask the counterpoint. I'd ask someone with a 3 to come in, then I'd go back to someone with a 2 and see what is emerging, what facts are emerging, whether people are changing their minds, whether people who have given it a 2 are saying, actually, on the back of what I'm hearing, my 2 is veering towards a 1, or my 2 is veering towards a 3. Some of the 1s might say, because they've got input now from people who have given it a 3, yeah, on the back of what I've heard there, I think my 1 was probably wrong. And at some point in the discussion, then I will get a sense of it's going this direction, it's going that direction. I'll make a proposal. If there's no objection, then that becomes the score, yes or no, the consensus. And if there is objection, then we thrash it out further until we get a consensus, okay? 2 things I always watch out for in looking at this profile of scores are whether, in fact, for example, if you look at research standing there, Roman 5, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 1s, and 4 2s. So that is a very split jury. But what I'd be looking for there would be 2 things. Are the people giving it a 3, or are the people giving it a 1? By and large, the people who are closest in disciplinary terms, and I mean broad disciplinary terms, so STEM versus non-STEM. So if the people who actually perhaps understand that broad area better, if they're generally saying this is a 3, are they going to put facts on the table that will persuade the 1s? Or if they're generally saying that it's a 1, will they put facts on the table that that will persuade the 3s that they were too generous? So I watch out for that kind of disciplinary divide in the discussion. It happens occasionally, but not very often. And the other thing I always watch out for is whether there's a gender divide. Is it, for example, you know, all of the women have given either a 2 or a 3, and it's mostly the men that have given a 1, or vice versa. And I would throw that into the discussion to see what reaction it provokes among the panel. It doesn't lead to any automatic conclusions, but it's just something to be aware of within the panel, and especially given where this scheme came from and the history of this institution is something to be constantly mindful of. Bearing in mind we have policies around this as well, and we are absolutely mindful of those throughout the discussions. So we thrash it out, and in this fictitious case, research impact, there were a couple of 1s in there. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 2s as well, so there were only 7 3s. But when we thrashed it out, it became a yes. Research standing, 5 3s, 4 2s, 5 1s. We thrashed it out. It became a no, whether because the consensus was a no, or whether we remained a split jury, it became a no. Innovation and teaching, there was only a single 1 in there, and there were another, 4 2s, 5 2s, slight majority of 3s, 8 out of 14. But we thrashed it out, and it became a yes. And then pedagogic research funding, 1, 2, 3, 4 2s there, only a couple of 3s. Profile that's unlikely but not impossible to become a 3. And by the time we thrashed it out, that became a no. Ergo, 2 criteria not met, prima facie case not established, applicant unsuccessful. And then the whole formulating the feedback and signing off as a team on the feedback and so on kicks in. Okay, so that's the procedure we go through with every single individual application, colleagues. And you can see why it takes multiple days throughout the spring or the autumn after the applications come in. We're determined to try and do justice to this. Now, if you're going to apply, you're expected to engage fully with your head of school before applying and after the outcome of the process. A head of school form, which must be countersigned by the dean, will be submitted by the head of school. The candidate will have a right of reply. Heads of school refer to school norms, and this is perhaps a good point to address this. Heads of school refer to school norms in there. They're being asked, the school norms are not the benchmark criteria for promotion, colleagues. The school norms are the benchmark criteria of whether you're at least doing your day job as currently employed. That and that alone is what the benchmarks are about. The school norms are about. So the head of school, in signing off that you're meeting the school norms, is really just saying you're doing your day job. And that's a bare minimum, really, to be considered for promotion, but it's not the criteria for promotion. 2 external members of senior academic experience are on the APC. One is from a STEM background, one is from an arts, humanities, social sciences background, and both have significant experience across research and T&L. The default adjective as used in the guidelines for criteria at each level, unless one of the others is explicitly used for an individual criterion, is as follows. Substantial for senior lecturer, associate professor, outstanding for the new professor in grade, and exceptional for established professor, as it was for personal professor. And I'll come to the little bit of tweaking that we've done later in the presentation. So following assessment and the establishment by the APC of a prima facie case, external assessors are ranked by the APC from lists provided by the applicant and the head of school. The list should be at least 50% international. Okay. We have had 1 or 2 heads of school presenting us with lists of external assessors that are entirely UCD and UCC. And really that's not what's expected here. This is an internationally benchmarked scheme, colleagues. And when we write to external assessors, we will be asking internationally, amongst other things, would this person get this grade at your institution? And therefore they need to be institutions of equivalent standing, and they need to be, some of them at least, international. Promotion will only follow if external assessors clearly agree with the recommendation of the APC. They should be at least at the academic level in their own institution, which the candidate is applying for, and in an institution or department of similar or higher reputational standing. And that is critical. So do think carefully about the external assessors that you nominate as an applicant. You're asked to list for, and the head of school will also be asked to list for. You should not be liaising with each other over that. And under no circumstances should that be contaminated. And you won't be entitled to see who the head of school's nominees are until after the application has concluded. Okay. You should not, under any circumstances, contact external assessors, colleagues. Let me make that clear. They will be asked, is there conflict of interest? They will be asked, has there been any contact? And you shouldn't be nominating people who have had recent associations with the university. Okay. With this university. So these assessors really must have no conflict of interest. The candidate and head of school should avoid nominating anything with whom the school or research institute has had recent formal interaction or with whom the candidate has collaborated. And there are guidelines around conflict of interest, and they're now on the promotions website. Assessors must also have the appropriate experience of promotions to be able to carry out the task of assessing the prima facie case. And we asked them that question in the form as well. Sorry. And under no circumstances should either you or the head of school contact the external assessors. Reapplication is not normally permitted within 2 years of an unsuccessful application. And there are a couple of exceptions which we'll come to shortly. Okay. And that is reapplication at any grade. So if you go for a higher grade and you're not successful, doesn't mean that you can then reapply within the 2 years for a lower grade. You simply cannot reapply for 2 years. Application is via the HR portal, just as if you were applying for any job with the university. That's how it's been set up. It was seen as the easiest way of doing this. So innovation in round 8. From round 8, a new promotional route, established professors being introduced that will replace the personal professors of promotional route. The criteria are largely the same, but there is an enhanced leadership requirement. Okay. So you really, if you're going for established professor, you need to be emphasizing pretty well throughout the form, the ways in which you have been leading. Okay. Don't give us long lists of memberships. and expect that to be sufficient. It may be relevant, for example, in international standing, although you would expect it to be very prestigious if you're going for established professor. But for example, the criteria around research leadership, too often people applying at all grades have been putting memberships of review panels as evidence of research leadership. You must spell out the leadership element if you're going to put it under leadership. Do not put simple memberships under there. That would be my solid advice, colleagues. Existing personal professors, like all other grades, must go through the application procedure in order to be promoted to established professor. So other innovations since round 5, I mean, this is almost doesn't feel like an innovation now because it's the 4th round we're going to have it. But the new grade approved by Uderson Hulskull in December 2021 was open as professor in whatever the discipline is, promotional route, and it's been there since round 5. And that really just brought us into line with the rest of the Irish sector. A further new grade established professor was approved in June 2023 and will replace the personal professor grade from round 8. Each of these grades has 3 pathways: a teaching and learning pathway, research scholarship pathway, and a leadership pathway. The level of achievement expected for promotion to the professor in grade is exactly halfway between that for SLAP and that for the old personal professor. Okay, and we probably need to replace that with established professor. Now, the level of in fact, I will do that with this slide afterwards, or I'll ask Orla if you could take a note and maybe do that before it goes up online. The level of achievement expected for promotion to established professor is double that of SL, a stroke associate professor, with an enhanced leadership expectation. That's a small typo there, isn't it? In line with the principles that apply in this scheme, all promotional grades are open to all academic staff. So you do not have to go through the different grades one by one. If you are a lecturer above the bar or below the bar, and you feel that you're right to go for professor in, you can go straight for it, bypassing SL on the way. And the best of luck to anyone who is feeling that confident. But we do not look at where you've come from in any way, shape, or form, or what your current grade is in any way, shape, or form, when we're assessing whether you're fit to be promoted to whatever you've applied for. It will be possible to fail to meet a single non-core criterion in your application and still be promoted if in the assessment of the APC there are enough compensating achievements in the rest of the application. So following a considered discussion, the committee agreed on wording that they would use as a principle in determining in a safe and consistent manner if an application established a prima facie case in the round. Quote, a case where the candidate's achievements in a majority of other criteria are, in the academic judgment of the APC, significantly above the required level. Now we can't put numbers in that. That's going to be an academic judgment. Okay. Some people are meeting the criteria and we're often comfortable. Yeah, that criterion is met. Sometimes we thrash it out and we come to the conclusion eventually that the criterion is being met. Occasionally it happens that you're looking at someone's application and saying, my God, they sailed through there. Why did they wait this long to go? You know? And if you're going to fall down on a single criteria, we would expect that you have sailed through, so to speak, in a majority of the other criteria. The reapplication rules are as follows. If you, in the event that you fail on a single non-core criteria, and the core and non-core are clearly marked in the application forms and in the guidelines, if you fail on a single non-core criterion, then you can reapply after 1 year. So the 2-year rule is reduced to 1 year. The other exception to the 2-year rule is if you apply for retention. Okay, so we don't look at that and say, no, you applied recently, you can't apply for retention. You can apply for retention at any time if you get, and it will be considered on the back of an appropriate offer from another institution that meet the criteria, which is an equivalent level of institution on the equivalent grade being offered, you know, equivalent standing of institution. So we can probably take that out actually of the presentation from now. So after we introduced the professor in, those who in rounds 2, 3, and 4 had failed to be promoted to personal professor had the 2-year rule waived for them because the professor in hadn't been available. But that actually is redundant now. We can take that out of the presentation while we're at it. Okay. Because unsuccessful applicants from rounds 1, 2, and 3 are now eligible in any case. Everyone is eligible. So apologies. I did go through this in advance. I didn't spot that had become dated. Effectively, the reapplication rules are that if you're successful, you can apply for the next grade up immediately. If you fail on a single non-core criterion but are not promoted, then you can't apply again at any level for 1 year. And if you fail on any core criterion or on more than one criterion, then you must wait 2 years. And really, colleagues, that's about trying to eliminate the possibility that the promotions committee, via the feedback and considerations on, would be used as a developmental tool for you. For when put it this way, would be used in loco head of school or whoever your senior head of discipline is. Innovations then, this again is I think established now. It's been in place for a year. You can optionally use the US style titles. Those promoted to SL can use the title associate professor, and the forms have been amended in line with this. Now, one thing that we are proposing bringing in for this round, and it will be up to you whether you tick the box. It's not a compulsory box. We've had a number of reapplications, I think about 20 over the 7 rounds of unsuccessful applications. And in a majority of cases, where a candidate fell down on a criteria at the first attempt, they got it the second time round. Occasionally they didn't. A majority of those who have reapplied have been successful, by the way, with their reapplication. But just occasionally it happens in a reapplication that a criterion you met 2 years ago, you're now not meeting, okay? And on the back of correspondence with the appeals committee, we are proposing that where a reapplication is considered, and we wouldn't know this, we wouldn't be checking this as part of the core discussions, but Orla as the administrator, if we got to the end of the discussion of a reapplication and Orla could see that a criterion previously met is now not being met, that we would do a consistency check, but that would involve looking back at the application and the reasons why the criterion was met before that is now not being met, to make sure that we are content with our rationale for now not deeming a criterion to be met that 2 years previously was met. Bear in mind issues around trajectory. Sometimes it happens that people barely got over the line 2 years ago, they've added nothing to it since, and that might be why it's fallen down, but it might also be, you know, personnel changes in the panel and so on, and the discussion may have gone a different way. So really what we're proposing is that if you wish, when you reapply, you can tick a box saying that if we are now failing you on a criterion that you previously passed, we can go back and look at what the grounds on which you passed it previously, to either assure ourselves that yes, you are now definitely not meeting the criterion, or to potentially have a rethink for your benefit. So this would only ever be used to bring you up. It could never be used to bring you down. Okay. And as I say, that's on the back of correspondence with the Academic Appeals, Promotions Appeals Committee. So that box will be there. It's optional, but that is the purpose of it. Okay. Now, there have been a very, very small number of criteria, and less than 5% of the criteria of reapplicants has it happened that what was previously met is now being met, is now not being met. But it occasionally happens, and this is just an added opportunity for us to think, are we confident with what we're saying now, or have we been maybe a bit harsh in light of what happened 2 years ago? Okay, it'll be up to you whether you tick that box or not. And then a reminder around the teaching portfolio and the student feedback document. The student feedback document should be submitted as a separate document to the teaching portfolio. Sometimes people, I'll make 2 points, by the way. 1 or 2 people have been very fond of editing the form to suit their own ends. Please don't do that. The form is a standard form. It should not be edited. You should not take out boxes that you're not filling in. You shouldn't change the orientation of things, etc., etc. Please use the form exactly as it is. Secondly, the student feedback document should be a separate document, a maximum of 2 pages on a maximum of 2 modules. And the teaching portfolio document should be a discrete document separate from the student feedback document. Okay, these are all in the guidelines. The guidelines are online and they have been refined. As with everything, we've kind of looked, we've tweaked, we've made minor changes, enhancements, etc. over the course of the almost 4 years of this scheme now. And we have two sets of academic promotions guidelines. One is for the research scholarship pathway, the other is for the teaching learning pathway from senior lecturer through to professor in through to personal professor. And the leadership track is in effect a hybrid of the two. So you can use either of those as the basis for your application for the leadership track, bearing in mind there are discrete leadership criteria then. So be clear that you're operating off the appropriate document when you apply. There had been schools, I hope there aren't any more, where no formal independent student feedback system was in place. This was to be addressed by schools for future promotion rounds effective from round 7, which was last February's closing date. As outlined in the feedback on modules and programs policy, schools and colleges are responsible for ensuring that such feedback practices are undertaken. Deans, heads of school, and their nominees are responsible for ensuring that the feedback process has been carried out and acted upon for all modules and programs. And there was an all-staff email to that effect last November, so well in time for anyone to have that implemented this spring. Now, let's look at the core criteria. When we were putting this scheme together, there was a clear sense, colleagues, across all the consultations with the unions, with the then heads of school, etc., that we should be creating a scheme that values those who contribute across a piece, even if we recognize for going to the higher levels that there may be specialisms along a research or a teaching and learning or a leadership track, but that the contribution should be across the piece. So the core criteria for contract type A are that your research and scholarly activity is understood to research and other forms of scholarship associated with research-informed teaching and with keeping up to date with developments in pedagogy in your discipline. So this may include pedagogic research or research as traditionally conceived in the discipline, or a combination of the two. You are not required to have your own individual research to go for senior lecturer contract type A. If you do, great. Because if you want to go above senior lecturer, if you want to go to professor in or personal professor, you will need research, and there'll be an expectation of a large chunk of it is pedagogic research. But you don't need it for SL. What you will be required to do, however, is show very, very clearly how the most up-to-date research informs the delivery of your teaching. Okay. Second bullet point is substantial record of teaching, supervision, mentoring, and a lot of that will be evidenced in the teaching portfolio. And the third is a substantial contribution to organizational leadership or management aspects internally and or intellectual, cultural, social, or economic life externally at regional, national, international level. Now, that is a single criteria. That contribution is a single criteria at SL. There is no expectation that of any particular weightings between internal and external. It's a clear recognition in the scheme that in some schools and some disciplines, there's a greater possibility for making a massive contribution internally. And in others, there are greater options or greater possibilities for making a contribution externally. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine at the level of applying for SL. It's whatever balance it is, it's whatever balance you've got. You may have, it may be 80% internal and very little external, it may be vice versa, but that is absolutely fine. When you get to the professor grades, they become two discrete criteria, internal and external, and there's a clear expectation that you will be performing at a high level in both internal and external terms. But at SL, it's whatever balance the opportunities that have arisen for you have facilitated. Contract type B, then, for SL is effectively the second and third bullet points are exactly as I've just described, but the first bullet point is that in contract type B, you are expected to have a substantial record of research scholarship. You should list your own research outputs appropriate to discipline and or interdisciplinary and elaborate on their significance, okay? Where work is multi-authored, you should in the narrative elaborate on the extent and significance of your own contribution, e.g. lead author, contributor. So it's worth saying something about research publications, and I'll come back to another point later about predatory journals. In some disciplines, most of the research that's done is sole authored, and that's fine, it's clear, it's your work, okay? Where you are in multi-authored, typically multi-authored disciplines, you should be clear about what your contribution to the research is. Now, disciplinary practices in terms of how authors are listed do vary. In some, it's alphabetical. In some, it's first and last, or first, second, and last, or whatever. And that's fine. And we recognize that when you're relatively junior, it can be harder to get last authored papers in some disciplines. That's fine. But you should be thinking in those terms as you develop your career. But either way, having the publications at SL is important. When you're moving beyond that, we will be expecting a significant portion, and at the top grade, even a majority of your publications to be with you as a lead author on there, and that you will spell that out for us, how that is the case. Okay. So in addition to the core, whether it's contract A or contract B, which have different expectations in terms of research or research publications, you then have 10 criteria, and you can choose any 5 you like. For both pathways, you can choose any 5 of these that you like. So it's worth going through them briefly because we've done a bit of tweaking with 2 of them just to create clarity on the back of the experience of the first 7 rounds. External research leadership, that is the extent to which any committee membership or reviewing role included here constitutes leadership, must be clearly demonstrated. Okay. So a list largely of memberships is unlikely to meet this criterion of leadership. It may well be indicative of research standing, which is Roman 5 there, but it's unlikely to meet the criterion of research leadership. So do think carefully before you choose the leadership. Can you genuinely make the case that you have been leading rather than merely reviewing and being a member? 2, successful supervision to completion of doctoral students, plural. Okay. So the other activity is contextual, but even in disciplines where PhDs and postdocs are extremely rare, you will have a minimum expectation of at least 2. In other disciplines where there are a lot of PhDs and a lot of postdocs, and they are quite common, 2 would not cut it for you at this stage. Okay, and this is the kind of information that we can get from the research office in terms of where scholarships have been going in recent years. Bear in mind, all of these criteria are optional. You're not forced to choose any one of them. Therefore, play to your strengths. 3 is research funding, and I'm going to take that in tandem with 10, which is pedagogic funding. So we had previously said that this is research funding and 10 is pedagogic research funding, but actually on the back of deliberations around a number of applications and so on, we feel that the simplest way forward for this is that any kind of research funding, which may include pedagogic research funding, should go under 3. Pedagogic funding then under Roman 10 is really about teaching funding. Funding that helps you enhance or develop courses or enhance your own delivery of teaching and so on. Okay. It's not fundraising activity, by the way, which you may have engaged with in conjunction with other people. It's about pedagogic funding that you secured for your teaching. Okay. Now, there may still be gray areas and there'll be a judgment call for you to make there. And we certainly aren't in the habit of as a panel, and never have been, looking at it and saying, yeah, we caught you out there. We don't take that approach to it at all. We take a constructive, positive approach, trying to see the best in every application. Okay. So we're not trying to trap people. But effectively, if it's research funding, it should go under 3. If it's pedagogic funding for the development of courses or whatever, then it's 10. Okay. Then 4 is the impact of research beyond academia. It cannot be emphasized enough, colleagues, because some people are still not paying attention to the nature of this criterion. It's research, impact of research beyond academia. In other words, out in society, it might be cultural organizations, it might be economic organizations, it might be public policy, it could be anything, but industry, so on. But it's beyond academia. You may well have 1 or 2 academic collaborators in that impact beyond academia, but you've got to demonstrate what changed beyond academia to meet that criterion. And then international research standing in the discipline, and that may well be prestigious invitations to give keynotes, to be on panels, editorial boards, etc., etc. That's the kind of research standing there, review panels and so on. Okay. Item 6, maintaining theoretical currency in your teaching, i.e. showing that your teaching is really informed by up-to-date theories in teaching. Somebody trying to come in there, have we? 7, innovation in teaching, using innovative methodologies in your teaching. Now, this is not simply the introduction of new courses. It's what did you do in those courses that was new and innovative and different. Okay. But simply telling us that you introduced new courses is not going to meet, is really unlikely to meet that criteria. National standing in teaching and learning, and in fact, if you've got international, in fact, maybe we need to amend that to national/international in teaching and learning. Now that we've got Enlight, for example, there are possibilities opening up across Europe. But that would be where you've been invited to be part of national bodies, national boards, etc., etc. Impact in teaching and learning. So this is where it differs from impact of research. Impact of research is about beyond academia. Impact in teaching and learning is where others have taken up some of the things that you have, innovations that you have introduced in your teaching. You've been invited to share the new methodologies, new approaches with other institutions, and they have subsequently taken up those innovations and applied them in other places. So that is the impact in teaching and learning, that others in teaching and learning have learned from you and applied that. It's not the impact on your students. Some have understood that. It's not the impact of on the classes that you teach. It's the impact on your colleagues. Okay. And then pedagogic funding we've already discussed. Then going to the next level up, professor, there are 3 tracks for promotion for either professor in or established professor as follows: research and scholarship, teaching and learning, and leadership. And you will see the criteria that we've just parsed for SL. They recur in these pathways, and you'll see that in a moment. The standard of achievement for established professors is typically twice the level expected for senior lecturer and associate professor. And the standard of achievement for professor in is typically 1.5 times that expected for senior lecturer. And apologies, I'm just gone too far there again. Is 1.5 times that expected for senior lecturer and associate professor. There are core criteria for all of the professorial tracks. So in the same way that at SL there are core criteria which are research, teaching and learning, and contribution, that now becomes 4 because the third one splits out between internal and external. So research and scholarship, teaching and learning, contribution to the academic unit, the college and university, contribution to the intellectual, cultural, social, or economic life externally to the university. And then if you go to the leadership track, there are 2 more core criteria, which are leadership at university level, significant evidence of transformative nature of the leadership, and leadership at national or international level. Okay. Now, how that breaks down into the different pathways is this. So, because there are different levels expected depending on what your specialism is. We're not asking you to be, if you want to be an established professor, to be absolutely top-notch in everything you do. Depending on the pathway, you're expected to be top-notch in that pathway, but other aspects of it can be 1 level below that. Okay. So we deal with professor in first and then make our way up to established professor. So the basic adjective at this level is outstanding. Okay. Outstanding contribution internally and outstanding contribution externally. That's in all tracks. No matter what track you go, that is expected from you. If you then go the research track, outstanding record of research is Roman 1 there. But a substantial contribution to teaching supervision, in other words, SL level at teaching and learning. Because you're going the research track, that is the concession. And we see that if you go to the teaching and learning track, those 2 are reversed. Outstanding record of research, if you want to be a professor in at research on the research track, Roman 7 then says substantial contribution to teaching, supervision, and mentoring of students. And then 2 to 6 in there, Roman 2 to 6, are effectively the first 5 and the optional 10 criteria at SL, but now by and large with the adjective outstanding rather than substantial in front of them. And I don't propose to go into Each of them again, it will be a bit repetitive, but that is the principle. If, on the other hand, you go on the teaching and learning track, then you will see that the expectation is that your teaching, supervision, and mentoring of students has been outstanding, and that's Roman 1, but Roman 7, a substantial record of research outputs. Okay, and the expectation is that some of those, a chunk of those would be pedagogic research if you're going with teaching and learning, because you're professing teaching and learning, professing in effect pedagogy. And then 2 to 6 in there are the 6 to 10, the teaching side of the house, on the 10 optional ones on the SL criteria. So do look carefully, whatever pathway you choose, do look carefully at the adjective when you're referencing the guidelines, whether it's substantial, whether it's outstanding, or whether it is exceptional. Okay, because the baseline for SL is substantial, the baseline for Professor In is outstanding, the baseline for established professor is exceptional, but depending on the pathway, that is the aspect, those are the aspects that need to be exceptional. Other aspects can be one level below. And then if we go the leadership track, so we've already seen that in addition to the 2 core criteria that are in every pathway, we have 4 more core criteria, but 2 of those are outstanding: outstanding leadership internally, outstanding leadership externally, and then both teaching and learning and recognition of the leadership dimension are at substantial level, 1 grade below. And then uniquely in the leadership pathway, you have options 5, 6, and 7 there. Are any of the criteria not already on this list from the PP research or T&L track? Then moving to established professor, again, the core are the same as for Professor In, and really all of this you're about to see an established professor is effectively what you've just seen as Professor In, except that where there was outstanding, there's now exceptional, and where there was substantial, there's now outstanding. So 2 core are internal and external contribution. If you go the research route, then your research is expected to be exceptional, Roman 1. Your teaching is expected to be outstanding, 1 level below that. And 2 to 6 in between are the 5 research-oriented of the 10 optional ones at SL, but with exceptional written in front of them. And then if we look at the teaching and learning track, again, like Professor In, but using different adjectives, teaching is now expected to be exceptional, Roman 1. Roman 7, research is expected to be outstanding. We did benchmark, by the way, the teaching and learning track for professor, and not all universities have it, but those that do expect those who are professors to be professing through research, even in the teaching and learning track, and by and large through pedagogic research, although it may be a mixture of pedagogic and disciplinary research. And then 2 to 6 are the 5 from the teaching side of the house on the 10 optional at SL. And then for the leadership track, it's the same. The 2 core for everyone, the 4 core, but whereas it's now exceptional leadership internally, exceptional leadership externally, and then the contribution to teaching and the contribution to research is outstanding, 1 level below that, and then 3 optional criteria. So there's clear pathway there and clear correlation between Professor In and established professor. Now, in terms of professional conduct, colleagues, members of the APC and the APAC are bound to absolute confidentiality in respect of all deliberations of the committees, subject only to the fact that documents are FOIable after the process. Under no circumstances should candidates approach or seek to influence members of the APC or APAC on any matter relating to their application. Members of the APC or APAC may not advise applicants either individually or in groups in respect of the promotion scheme. When somebody has served their time on this promotions committee, they can do whatever they like about forward, planning for forward applications. They can't give individual feedback on anybody's application. That is a matter strictly for this process, but they can do whatever advising they like. And as the scheme has proceeded, some colleagues have stepped out of the scheme, albeit it continues to evolve. So they would need to make sure that they were actually completely on top of where we currently are in giving any such advice. But while they're on either committee, they may not engage in individual or group advice in any way, shape, or form. And then heads of school and deans are required to respect and maintain the confidentiality of all individual applications. And just to say that heads of school have asked me where there are large schools and a lot of what might be the head of school function in a smaller school is performed by head of discipline. Can heads of discipline be involved in this? And yes, absolutely, but they'll be required to abide by exactly the same rules in terms of confidentiality. A couple of general points to be made just in the light of our own experience, and this is advice rather than requirements. There is a whole issue coming up now around predatory journals, and if you Google the concept of predatory journals, you will see different people offering different lists. I'm not going to go into the space of offering you lists. I don't want to open myself to litigation or this university to litigation, colleagues, okay? But there are journals out there on the back of the whole open access movement who will now, for a fee, publish your article in journals that have entirely plausible looking titles, but frankly, the editorial boards are a shadow, and the peer review is virtually non-existent. Everyone who is a serious researcher in this university should be wary of that, wary of such journals, and frankly should be avoiding them. So it's your duty to inform yourself, because we will be looking for that kind of thing in the applications, okay? And you know, there's different disciplinary expertise in the university. Everybody's becoming more aware of it. Really, my strong advice would be don't go there, okay? Secondly, your iris profile can be downloaded as a Word document and edited. So when I've looked at many iris profiles, not just in the context of promotions, but in the 9 years I've been in this university, I've looked at massive numbers of iris profiles. And you see items input there in the most random order at times, colleagues, and certainly not chronological. So it bears considering, for the benefit of making your application look more professional, if nothing else, that when you download the iris profile, download it as a Word document and edit it using clear categorization of types of outputs in line with the application form, and there are categories in the application form, and listing them in reverse chronological order so that it can be very easily determined, are you currently performing or not? You know? I mean, the APAC has had this discussion at times. It hasn't impacted on anybody's outcome, but it has certainly facilitated better discussion when the documentation is clear. Okay. So that's a request rather than an instruction or a requirement. Okay. And just a reminder that following the deliberations of the APC, there is an external assessment stage of the process. So we establish a prima facie case, and in all but one instance so far, in 7 rounds, the external assessors have confirmed our verdict. But there is an external assessment stage of the process, and that can sometimes take a bit of time. And because we ask for declarations of conflict of interest, we sometimes write to external assessors, we don't get a reply. We sometimes get a letter back saying, I mean, often we get a letter back saying, yes, we can do it. Otherwise, nobody would have been promoted by now. But sometimes we get letters back saying, no, I'm not available. Thank you very much. Or I don't believe this is my area of expertise. And on 1 or 2 occasions, we've got requests back. We've got letters back asking, what is the fee for doing this? And the fee is zero. You know, people are doing this because it's what you do in academia, in a collegial space across all the institutions. Okay, but that can sometimes lead to delays between the APC prima facie case and the final verdict. So just bear that in mind when, you know, if you get a verdict that says prima facie case established and there are delays, it's not that we aren't chasing it up, it's not that we're not on top of it, but some of it is outside our control because we are writing to people from all over the world asking them effectively to do us and you a favor. Those are the deadlines. It's 4 p.m. on the last working day of the month, every 6 months, August and February. So the deadline now is 31st of August. for this round. Next spring, it will be Leap Day. That deadline probably won't come up too soon again. 29th of February, and so on. And you can see, so it's not necessarily always the last day of the month, it's the last working day of the month. And then the information on the scheme is at that site, homepage/academic promotions. Questions may be addressed to academic promotions at universityofgalway.ie. And the link to the HR application system is included on the academic promotions homepage, ess.universityofgalway.ie. So I've reached the end of my presentation. I see some comments. There are some comments in the chat.